I never imagined the man I built my life with, the man I trusted to hold my hand through childbirth, would be the same one accusing me of stealing my own baby. It wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation. The day I came home from the hospital, stitches still raw and my body aching, I found a DNA test kit sitting on the kitchen table, neatly boxed, unopened, cold. A note next to it, scribbled in my husband Mark's handwriting, simply read, "For everyone's peace of mind." I laughed at first. Surely this was some kind of misunderstanding. A sick joke, maybe. But then he came down the stairs, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep or maybe guilt, and repeated it to my face. "We just need to be sure, Angela. Mom thinks the baby looks off." That moment shattered something inside me that has never fully healed. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was humiliated, stripped of dignity in the one place I was supposed to feel safest. My daughter hadn't even turned a week old, and already I was being treated like a liar. Like a thief. Like a woman who might have stolen a child from another woman's womb. But here's the part that really destroyed me. He didn't ask for a paternity test. He asked for a maternity test. As if I might have swapped my own baby. As if the hours I screamed through labor weren't enough proof of my motherhood. As if my blood, my body, and my soul weren't enough. And while I stood there, numb, confused, milk leaking through my hospital gown, Mark's mother Elaine stood beside him like a high priestess of judgment, arms folded, eyes narrowed, lips pursed in silent disgust. She never liked me. From the moment we met, she called me small-town ambitious and average-blooded. Her obsession with legacy, with keeping the family name pure, always lingered beneath the surface. Now it had festered into something vile. "You're being overly emotional," Mark said flatly when I began to cry. "If you have nothing to hide, then just take the test." The test that questioned my very identity as a mother. The test that said, "Prove to us you are who you say you are." I was too exhausted to scream. Too hollow to fight. So I signed the forms. I let the nurse swab my cheek. I watched as they pricked my newborn daughter's tiny heel to collect her sample. The baby cried in confusion. I cried in silence. A few days later the results came in. I was the mother. Of course I was. But no one apologized. No one said, "We were wrong." No one asked how it felt to be treated like a criminal in your own home. But what happened next? That changed everything. Because the woman at the lab raised her eyebrows when she handed over the envelope and said quietly, "There's something odd about this file. Might want to double-check your husband's DNA on record. It doesn't align with the supposed grandparent marker." I didn't understand at first. But her words kept echoing in my head. "Doesn't align." That's when it clicked. If the child was biologically mine and the lab found inconsistencies not with me, but with Mark's lineage, then maybe the rot wasn't coming from me. Maybe it was coming from the family that had spent years looking down on me. I had been accused. I had been humiliated. Now I was going to find out the truth. About him. About his mother. About everything they tried to bury. And what I uncovered. It didn't just blow up their perfect little world. It burned it to the ground. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the dark with my daughter cradled against my chest, feeling her breath rise and fall, soft and real. Mine. My body still ached from delivery, but the bruises that hurt most weren't visible. They were stitched into the fabric of my soul, invisible scars left by the man who was supposed to love me unconditionally. And now, the whisper from that lab technician was lodged in my brain like a splinter. Something was off with his DNA. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was probably a lab error or just a mismatch in genetic markers. But deep down, something had already cracked open, and when something cracks, light starts to seep in. The more I thought about it, the more things started to feel off. Mark never talked much about his childhood. His relationship with Elaine, the ever-watchful matriarch, was strangely formal, like a performance they both agreed to put on for the world. I always assumed they were just a wealthy family, kind of distant. But now, with that lab worker's odd comment echoing in my head, I began to suspect it ran deeper than that. I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I did what any woman pushed to the edge would do. I went back to the lab. I told them I wanted a full paternity panel, one that included Mark and his parents. They hesitated at first, citing privacy issues. But I pushed. I insisted. I lied and said we needed it for medical history reasons. And finally they gave in. I got the samples. Elaine's brush from the guest room. Mark's toothbrush from the bathroom. And our baby's results were already on file. When I handed everything in, the technician looked at me like she recognized the desperation burning in my eyes. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and said, "Come back in 3 days." 3 days. 72 hours of trying to act normal around a man who had just accused me of swapping our child in secret. A man who kissed our daughter's head like he hadn't just violated the very foundation of our marriage. A man who lay beside me in bed while I stared at the ceiling, wondering what other secrets he was hiding. When the results came in, I didn't open them at the lab. I waited until I got home, laid my baby gently in her crib, closed the door behind me and locked myself in the bathroom. And when I opened that envelope, when I saw the words printed clearly in black and white, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Alleged father is the biological parent. Yes. Alleged grandmother is the biological parent of alleged father. A no match. What the hell? Mark wasn't Elaine's son. My husband, the same man who said my daughter didn't look like him, wasn't who he thought he was. He wasn't her son. He wasn't the heir to her pristine bloodline. He was a secret. A bastard child raised under a carefully constructed illusion. And suddenly everything made sense. Why Elaine always seemed uncomfortable with real affection. Why Mark was treated more like a possession than a son. Why she was so obsessed with appearances, with legacy. Because she had something to hide. And the most ironic part? Their need to humiliate me had opened the door to exposing themselves. I sat there shaking, the paper fluttering in my lap. My first instinct was to scream. My second was to confront him. But I knew if I did it now, angrily, emotionally, I'd lose the upper hand. No. This wasn't the time to explode. It was time to investigate. To pull at every thread. To find out who Mark really was. And once I knew that, I'd make sure the whole world found out too. Because if they thought humiliating me with a DNA test would bring peace of mind, they were about to experience something far more permanent. Ruin. I couldn't look at Mark the same way anymore. Every time he walked into the room, every time he kissed our daughter's forehead, every time he tried to hold my hand, all I could see was the man who doubted me. The man whose own identity was a lie, yet he dared to question mine. But I couldn't confront him yet. Not without knowing everything. So I started digging. Late at night, after feeding the baby and putting her down, I would sneak into the office, sifting through boxes of family documents Elaine had gifted us when we moved into this house. Old tax returns, photographs, letters. Most of it was harmless. But then one night I found a thin leather folder tucked behind a stack of files. Inside there was a birth certificate. It was Mark's. Or at least it should have been. But something wasn't right. The certificate was issued 2 months after his supposed birth date. The attending doctor's name was smudged, almost intentionally, like someone had tampered with the ink. There was no record of the hospital Elaine always claimed she gave birth in. I felt my blood run cold. The more I stared at that document, the clearer it became. This wasn't a simple error. It was a cover-up. Elaine had built her entire empire on lies. The perfect family image, the charitable foundation, the carefully curated narrative of heritage. And here it was unraveling in my hands. I needed answers and I needed them now. So I called an old friend of mine, Michelle, who worked as a nurse in the very hospital Elaine claimed she had Mark. She owed me a favor from years back and I knew if anyone could dig into old records, it was her. 2 days later she called me back, her voice trembling. "Angela, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's no record of Elaine ever giving birth at this hospital. Not to Mark. Not to anyone. In fact," she paused, "there's a note here from years ago. It says Elaine and her husband adopted a newborn privately, under sealed records, just days after a young woman passed away in our maternity ward. The mother's name wasn't Elaine." I sank onto the kitchen floor, my body trembling. Mark wasn't just not her biological son. He was never meant to know the truth. His entire existence had been carefully orchestrated, hidden under a facade of privilege and secrecy. And the cruelest twist? The same woman who accused me of lying about my baby was the biggest liar of all. The next time I saw Elaine, I couldn't stop staring at her. She was sitting in the living room, sipping tea like a queen on her throne, talking about the importance of family values, as if she hadn't stolen her own son's past. She must have noticed the fire in my eyes because she leaned forward with that icy smile of hers and said, "Something on your mind, dear?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the DNA report in her face and watch her composure crack. But instead I smiled. "No," I said sweetly. "Everything's just fine." Because I wasn't ready to reveal what I knew. Not yet. I was going to gather every piece of proof, every document, every lie she'd ever told, and when the time came, I wouldn't just confront her. I'd burn down the entire house of cards she'd spent decades building. And the first step, finding out if Mark even knew. That night after he fell asleep, I slid the DNA results under his pillow and waited for morning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each breath, listening to the steady hum of the baby monitor and the occasional shift of Mark beside me. My heart pounded like a ticking time bomb, knowing that when morning came, the ground beneath us would finally crack open. And it did. Just before dawn, Mark sat up slowly, groggily rubbing his eyes. I watched him reach under the pillow and pull out the envelope I had slid there hours earlier. His fingers hesitated, tracing the sealed edge, like his body already sensed that what lay inside would destroy the life he thought he knew. "Angela, what is this?" he asked, his voice still thick with sleep. I didn't answer. I just sat up and looked at him with all the weight of what I'd learned pressing on my chest. He opened it. His eyes scanned the DNA results slowly at first, then with growing panic. I saw it. The disbelief, the confusion, the fear, as the lines on the paper began to make sense to him. And then finally his face drained of color. This says I'm not related to my father," he whispered. "Keep reading," I said, my voice calm but cold. "Check the maternal line too." He blinked, the paper trembling in his hands as he flipped to the second page. His mouth parted but no words came. Just a soft, broken sound, like something had fractured inside him. "No, this can't be right." "It is," I said, barely above a whisper. "I checked. I had it verified twice. You're not their biological child, Mark. You never were." He turned to me wide-eyed, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't form the words. "But, Elaine, my mother, she always told me she had a difficult labor. She said I almost died. That's why she was so protective of me growing up. Why would she lie about something like that?" "Because the truth was never convenient," I said, my voice shaking now. "You were adopted, Mark. Illegally, it seems. She's hidden it for decades. And now, after everything she's done to me, after dragging me through hell and questioning our daughter's this is the truth she tried to bury." He looked like he had been punched. No, there's no way. You must have made a mistake." I stood and walked to the drawer in the hallway where I'd kept the old birth certificate and the sealed documents Michelle had sent me from the hospital. I laid them all in front of him. "Check the dates. Look at the signatures. See for yourself, Mark." His hands trembled as he sifted through the papers, the last bits of denial clinging to him like a drowning man grabbing for a lifeline. But the more he read, the more I saw it, the slow collapse. "I don't understand," he said again, his voice small now. Why would they never tell me?" "Because Elaine controls everything," I said bitterly. "Even the truth. Especially the truth. She built her identity on perfection, on power, on appearances. You were just part of the illusion." Mark sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. I saw the boy in him then, the child who had grown up believing in bedtime stories and maternal affection, now being told it had all been a lie. A performance. And I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered him standing in that hospital room, hurling accusations at me. I remembered him signing the paternity test form without even looking me in the eye. I remembered crying alone in the bathroom with our newborn daughter asleep in the next room, while he questioned the most sacred thing I'd ever known. He had broken something between us that day. Something trust couldn't fix. And now it was his turn to carry the weight of betrayal. "I need to talk to her," he said finally. I stepped in front of him. No, Mark. Not yet. You need to sit with this. You need to understand what it means. Because if you go to her now, she'll lie. She'll spin a story, she'll play the victim, and you'll believe her. You always do. He looked at me, eyes wide with pain. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because I wanted you to feel what I felt, I said softly. To know what it's like when the person you trust most looks you in the face and decides you're a liar. When they'd rather believe their own mother than the woman they married. Mark didn't say anything. He just stared at the floor, his hands limp in his lap. And in that silence I knew he finally understood. But understanding didn't erase what had happened. It didn't undo the damage or change what we had become. And what hurt the most was knowing that even with all the truth in front of him, Mark still wasn't the one who uncovered it. I was. 3 days. That's how long it took for Mark to confront Elaine. 3 days of silence that stretched through our house like fog. He didn't eat. He barely spoke. He just sat with the documents I'd handed him, reading and rereading them like if he stared long enough they might change. But they never did. On the third morning he stood up from the kitchen table, his shoulders squared in a way I hadn't seen since our wedding day. He looked like a man walking into battle. And for the first time since all this began, I didn't try to stop him. Elaine's house was a 30-minute drive from ours, but it felt like a descent into enemy territory. I didn't go with him. I needed him to do it alone. I needed him to face her without the cushion of me shielding him from the truth. But I watched from the security app on my phone. I had cameras installed outside Elaine's home after she once, accidentally, took our daughter from daycare without telling me. I watched the car pull into her pristine driveway. I watched him hesitate, then walk up the steps. When she opened the door, her face lit up with that same polished, rehearsed smile. It slipped almost instantly when she saw his expression. She said something, probably her usual, "Marky, is everything all right?" But he didn't hug her. He pushed past her into the house. 10 minutes later I got the first text. She's denying it. Saying the papers were forged. Of course she was. Elaine didn't deal in truth. She dealt in narrative. And she'd been crafting hers for decades. I waited. Then the second text came. She says I was premature. That I almost died. She said the hospital must have made a mistake. I could almost hear her smug voice in those words. Almost see her pacing in that silk robe she always wore like she was royalty. But the next one shook me. She just said something weird. She said, "It doesn't matter if I carried you or not. I'm your mother and I raised you better than that woman ever could have." And there was. I sat down on the couch and whispered to myself, she just admitted it. A few minutes later the app pinged again. I opened it to see Mark stumbling out of her house like a ghost, her voice chasing him, shrill and brittle. "You owe me, Mark. I gave you everything. You think she would have loved you if you didn't have the life I gave you? I made you." He didn't even look back. He drove home in silence, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. When he walked through the door I barely recognized him. "Hello." "She admitted it," he said quietly. Not directly. But she did. She just didn't expect me to connect the dots. I nodded. "She never loved me," he whispered almost like a child. "She loved control. She loved the image. I was just her puppet." For the first time since the hospital I went to him. Not as his wife, but as someone who knew what it was like to have your foundation ripped out from under you. "She doesn't get to rewrite your life anymore," I said. "You get to choose who you are now. You get to decide who your family is." He looked at me like he was trying to believe me. Like he wanted to. But I could still see the war behind his eyes. The man who defended her so blindly had died in that house. And what remained was someone unsure of everything. "She called our daughter a mistake," he whispered. "Said she never should have been born. That did it. The final blow." I saw the way his jaw clenched. The way his eyes finally burned, not with confusion but with fury. "I want her out of our lives," he said suddenly. "I want her gone. I don't care what it takes." I didn't smile. I didn't say "I told you so." Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming the life she tried to steal from us. Mark spent the next few days drafting a letter, detailing everything Elaine had done. The illegal adoption, the forged records, the harassment, the manipulation. He attached the DNA results, the birth certificates, the statements from the hospital worker Michelle had tracked down. And he sent it to every board Elaine sat on. Her charity committees, her social clubs, her church, her entire kingdom. And when the walls started to crumble, she came for us one last time. Elaine didn't go down quietly. The moment the emails went out, her world began to shatter. Whispers spread through the charity gala circuits. Donations froze. Her spotless reputation, built on lies, manipulation, and social climbing, started to bleed. But she didn't retreat. Not Elaine. He came back fighting. It started with threats. Cease and desist letters from her lawyer. Accusations of defamation. A dramatic post on Facebook filled with crocodile tears, claiming her ungrateful son had been brainwashed by a jealous, unstable woman. That woman was me, of course. She even hinted at legal action to protect the truth. The truth. That word had lost all meaning in Elaine's mouth. But she had underestimated how deeply people were already turning against her. She thought reputation alone could shield her. That if she wore pearls and gave speeches about charity work, people would forget the stench of the rot beneath. What she didn't count on was the nurse. Her name was Clara Reyes. She had worked at the same hospital where Mark was born, nearly 40 years ago. She had seen the original birth records, and the revised ones. And she had been haunted by the change ever since. When she saw the viral posts and Mark's letter, which had been anonymously leaked to the media, Clara came forward. Publicly, she gave a sworn statement. Admitted that Elaine's powerful family had made calls. That the real mother, a frightened teenage girl, had disappeared after giving birth. That Elaine had shown up with her husband and walked out holding a child that wasn't hers, claiming him as her own. Mark wasn't just adopted. He had been stolen. That's when everything fell apart. Elaine's face was splashed across news sites and morning talk shows. Socialite implicated in historic child theft scandal. Every polished lie, every charity award, every smug condescension collapsed under the weight of public outrage. Her board memberships? Revoked. Her social circle? Shunned her. Her fortune? Under investigation. The day she was arrested, I watched the news coverage with Mark beside me. His hands trembled as the footage played. Elaine in handcuffs, eyes defiant but face pale with disbelief. She had thought herself untouchable. But karma doesn't wear silk gloves. She always said I had her eyes, Mark said quietly. I turned to him. Maybe you did. But your soul? That never belonged to her. He didn't respond right away. He just reached over and picked up our daughter, who had toddled into the room dragging a toy. He held her close like she was his anchor. I almost lost all of this, he whispered. Because I believed her more than I believed you. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I wrapped my arms around both of them. You came back, I said. That's what matters. In the months that followed, Mark began therapy. Not the Band-Aid kind, but the deep, painful excavation of a lifetime of lies. He wanted to understand who he truly was. Not the boy Elaine had molded, but the man he could choose to be. And us. We began again. Not perfectly, but honestly. There were still hard nights, still echoes of the things she said, the damage she left. But they no longer had power over us. Then one day the letter arrived. From a woman in Kansas. She had seen the news and recognized the name of the hospital, the year, and the child taken. She was the birth mother. She never wanted to give Mark up. But she was 17. Poor. Alone. They had told her he died during delivery. She had grieved for decades. Now she knew the truth. She wanted nothing. No money, no involvement, no drama. Just a chance to meet him. Just once. Mark read the letter in silence. Then he looked at me, tears brimming. She's the reason I exist, he whispered. I want to see her. When they met, it wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming reunions or tear-soaked speeches. Just two people who had been robbed of decades, sitting across from each other in a quiet park, sharing stories and piecing together the life they never got to share. It was healing. In the end, Elaine lost everything. But Mark found something more valuable than revenge. He found the truth in us. We built something stronger than anything Elaine ever tried to destroy. We built a home where truth was sacred, where love wasn't conditional, and where our daughter would grow up never having to doubt who she was or where she came from. And as I tucked her in one night, her tiny voice asked, "Mommy, are lies bad?" I thought about it. Then I smiled. "Lies try to cover things up, baby," I said. "But truth always finds a way to shine. Even if it takes a scandal to set it free." If this story gripped your heart like it gripped mine, don't forget to like, comment, and share. And follow for more dramatic, true-to-life revenge stories, because every day, a new truth comes to light. New episodes drop daily. Stick around, you don't want to miss what's next.